Don't believe the crap you see from these people, the fake news. I mean, I saw a piece on NBC today. NBC. It was heart-throbbing. They were interviewing people. They probably go through 20, and then they pick the one that sounds like the worst. But they went through a group of people. In fact, I wanted to say, I got to do something about this Trump. Terrible. And that piece was done by the lobbyists and by the people that they hire. It was a total setup.
That was President Trump yesterday in Missouri, seemingly referring to a story we aired on Morning Joe about the economic pressure American farmers and producers are under because of Trump's escalating tariffs. Here again is that report from MSNBC's Vaughn Hilliard.
That whole future is uncertain right now.
American workers across the country are bearing the brunt of the Trump administration's growing trade war. It's a frustration we heard in the lobster waters of Maine.
I feel like it was a kick in the stomach.
Or in Iowa, where pork and corn exports are sidelined.
Other countries will take up that slack, and we'll lose those markets for the long term, maybe for good.
That dread has reached the cranberry bogs of Massachusetts.
We don't want to be punished for just being from America.
The market uncertainty stretches into Kentucky's bourbon distilleries and across the potato fields of Idaho.
It's a sense of urgency. Right now, we have the crop in the ground.
And back here in Nebraska, soybeans.
Well, right now it's a lot of pain that we're going through.
Third-generation family farmer Doug Bartek hopes the president he voted for will end this trade war.
Every day that these tariffs are going on is costing farmers millions of dollars.
As producers wait for Trump's exit strategy, his chief economic advisor says we're in a stalemate with China.
The trade negotiations are kind of stalled.
And the president's handpicked Fed chair is warning these tactics could stunt economic growth.
Countries that have gone in a more protectionist direction have done worse.
On Capitol Hill, we caught up with lawmakers from Trump-voting states, calling for the administration to pull back.
Do they understand what farmers and ranchers want and need? No, the administration doesn't understand.
I understand the president's efforts, but we are caught in the crosshairs.
There's not a senator who's been over there that can come back and tell you they have any earthly idea where this is going.
But I can tell you it's catastrophic.
And now senators in both parties are pressing for legislation to give Congress approval power over these tariffs.
I'm doing this to do the right thing for our country.
President Trump seems set on going it alone, which frustrates lobster retailer Mark Merle in Portland, Maine.
The president said during his convention speech back in 2016 that he alone could fix it.
Right, yeah. He's trying, and that's the problem. The alone part is the problem, right? He doesn't have the full picture, and he's making decisions without really talking to enough people.
And joining us now from Rapid City, South Dakota, the correspondent in the field behind that heart-throbbing story, as the president put it, political reporter for NBC News, Vaughn Hilliard. Vaughn, good morning. It's good to see you again this morning. First of all, was your piece a setup by lobbyists? And if so, how did you rope in all those Republican senators to talk on camera?
Well, I guess this lobbyist didn't see much impact on his own bank account, Willie. But these are farmers that we met out across rural America. Quite frankly, a lot of them are people that you pick up the phone and you give a call to, and they said, "Come on out. We've never even seen the press come to our front doors before." These are individuals. All those individuals you heard from Willie in that piece all voted for President Trump, and they said that today they still have that hope in the president that he is going to be able to negotiate that better deal. I said it's now been 4.5 months, though, that this trade war has been going on, and they said perhaps they were a little bit too confident with what the president was going to be able to actually be able to pull off. But they said in the meanwhile, in this current situation, there's a $12 billion financial aid plan, essentially, that was announced by the administration, by the U.S. Department of Agriculture yesterday, which will go to help a lot of these farmers, pork producers, corn producers, wheat, cotton farmers. But there's also a lot of farmers that are left out. These are individuals like the lobstermen that you heard from, the fisheries that are up in the air. What about the bourbon distilleries out in Kentucky and Tennessee? There's a lot of questions that are going forward that are going to have to be answered, and it does also not account that program for any future retaliatory tariffs. I talked to Bob Hemisath, He's in Decorah, Iowa. He's a longtime third-generation corn and pork producer up in Decorah, Iowa. And he said that while this program will be aiding the likes of him and other farmers, corn producers, he said that the big question mark coming out of this is, and I guess the big consequence of this trade standoff is the long-term impact. We're talking about export markets. A lot of these farmers like Bob could withstand the immediate financial impact, but it's where are other countries, their big export markets, like those lobstermen you heard from. 20% of U.S. lobsters go overseas into Asia. So the question is, are those markets going to be beginning to turn elsewhere? And ultimately, people like those lobstermen or like those corn producers that have relied on those export markets before, those export markets are going to begin to turn to other countries instead of American-made products.
And a lot of those producers saying, we don't want bailouts, we want free trade. We want to be open to those markets. A number of pro-free trade Republicans are criticizing the president's $12 billion aid package. Speaking with Politico yesterday, Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin said, quote, "This is becoming more and more like a Soviet type of economy here. Commissars deciding who's going to be granted waivers. Commissars, the administration, figuring out how they're going to sprinkle around benefits." And here is Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska.
When you choose a war of choice, which is what this trade war is, and then you say afterwards, let's just solve it by buying people gold-plated crutches, the farmers and ranchers of America, they don't want crutches. They want to work.
So, Noah Rothman, you had Ben Sasse was speaking again and again on this yesterday and the day before about this idea that the president set up the problem with the tariffs, and his correction now is a bailout for tariffs. And it was Senator Sasse who said the farmers in my state of Nebraska don't want a bailout, they want free trade.
Right, and when these bailouts are distributed, it's more likely that they're going to go to big agribusiness, not those really small farmers. Sometimes you see flashes of the Republican DNA, the conservative DNA sort of reemerge
every so often.
Yeah. Right, and so one of the things that we're going to start seeing now is the USDA is appealing to this Depression-era commodity credit corporation to start buying up surplus goods that they can't sell on markets. So we're going to be producing a lot of food that no one's going to be eating, that's going to sit in a pile and rot. That is incredibly inefficient. It's the sort of thing that Republicans know in their marrow is wrong, is bad economic policy, and is something that they have opposed all the way up until January 20th, 2017. But you can only go so far. You can't directly oppose this president because he is still so popular with the base of Republicans. Even these people who are being so damaged by these policies, they still believe in their hearts that this guy has their best interests in mind. All evidence to the contrary notwithstanding.
You hear them say that in these interviews with Von Hilliard too. They'll say if he only had the information that we had, he would make a different decision.
And can I just jump in again and talk about this idea of a Soviet economy, which is that here in the Financial Times, we've been digging into the bureaucratic headaches of actually administrating some of these tariffs. We looked at steel. 16,000 applications have been made already. 16,000 by American businesses for exemptions. Just think about that paperwork. And so far, they've only got around to looking at 500 of those. Just think about what the bureaucrats are going to have to deal with to actually get through all this stuff. Then think about what it's going to mean to try to administer payouts to farmers. And for the uncertainty for American companies is huge. In the steel sector, we talked to a company, Zap Precision Wire, down in South Carolina. It says that its application for specialized wire for windscreen wipers has been accepted. Steel plates for repairing broken bones has been rejected. Why? Just think about the practicalities of that, and then imagine what the farmers are going to have to face in terms of all this.
By the way, in a rich Morning Joe tradition, we like to introduce our guests after they've offered great insights, as you just said. That's U.S. Managing Editor of the Financial Times, Gillian Tett. She's with us. Meanwhile, the head of the European Commission is scheduled to meet with the president today. Ahead of that, President Trump tweeted yesterday, countries that have treated us unfairly on trade for years are all coming to Washington to negotiate. This should have taken place many years ago, but as the saying goes, better late than never. Gillian, what should we expect today?
Well, it's going to be very interesting because, in fact, the president is doing the same thing with the president of the European Commission as he did with Vladimir Putin, which is basically he's meeting him with other aides for a bit. He's also having a 15-minute private face-to-face meeting. Now, Juncker, who's coming from Europe, is not really empowered to offer very much, but this is a desperate last-ditch attempt by the Europeans to do this kind of face-to-face thing with the president, which they think is the only thing that's going to work, because they think he's the only one really setting policy now, to try and head off these tariffs. Something that the American voters should know about right now, though, is Europe has already reacted to what the Americans are doing right now on the trade side by moving at lightning speed to cut a new trade deal with Japan. So one of the very interesting things is that the rest of the world is not necessarily going to sit there and wait for this kind of negotiating strategy and dance. They're already trying to find ways to bolster alliances with each other to keep trade going.
And by the way, Juncker has been critical of President Trump, so it'll be an interesting meeting between the two personalities today.
Yeah, very much so. And it comes on the heels, of course, of the president's rather destabilizing visit to Europe last week. Not just Helsinki's
rather
taken all...
destabilizing.
It's been lost. A lot of it's been lost because of the aftermath of Helsinki. But what happened prior to that is the visit to NATO, what he did in the UK, the way he attacked allies left to right. I mean, the calling out Angela Merkel in Germany for the pipeline in Russia, the deal that they made. And that, of course, comes just a few weeks after he ripped up the G7 and refused to sign the communique. So a question for you, Vaughn, if we talk about these tariffs and such, is there, in the people you've talked to, and we see that then they still support this president, do you have any sense as to what that breaking point might be? What might be the thing that gets them to finally give up their support for someone that they have championed, and at least to this point they still seem like they still believe in?
I think, Jonathan, it comes down to the next layers of politics, and it's a question of the obligation of governance, because one man after the next, there's a few that have dropped off of their support of the president, but what I constantly heard was, would you, let's say the president was up here in 2018, despite soybeans dropping by 20%, would you still support him come this November? And they said, at this point in time, they have every reason to believe that they would. And I said, well, what would you need to hear from a Democrat? And they said that we would want to hear about stability. We would want to be able to hear that our markets would be fought for. And they said that we feel like the president to this day continues to fight for us. He's not getting the results that we want, but we see that he's out there on the world stage fighting for ag and fighting for American farmers. They still wholeheartedly believe that. And so that goes to the question, and that's why I think it's also good to talk to a lot of farmers out there that have voted for Hillary Clinton too, because it comes down to what that obligation of governance is. And once you are in political office, what is it ultimately that you need to do in that position at that point? And sorry, as I see my light turn off here in these fields of South Dakota, I think it's a question where a lot of these farmers are frankly out here. The farmers are out here at 4 a.m. every morning is the point I want to make, and we've joined a lot of them out here at 4 or 5 in the morning. And these are people, as you guys said, they have their crops that are coming up. Wheat is being harvested now. Come this September and October, corn is coming up. They need a place to send it, and they don't want it to just go to storage bins. This is more than a business. This is their livelihood, and this is for towns all across America what they rely on to sustain themselves.
How about Vaughn Hilliard powering through the darkness with his great reporting from Rapid City, South Dakota. Vaughn, great job out there. We look forward to your next stuff coming up. Thanks so much. Jillian, before we go, you mentioned that trade deal that the EU struck with Japan.
Yeah.
To what extent is Europe turning away? They'll never turn away, obviously, completely from the United States, but accepting that the partner they have now in the United States isn't as reliable as it's been?
Well, Angela Merkel said before that they realize increasingly in Europe that they're going to have to rely on themselves. Now, the problem is that Europe's own political structures are pretty messed up, frankly, so that's not necessarily a good thing. But there is a growing sense that the entire world order is being set, and although America has played a key leadership role in the post-World War II global system, the rest of the world is realizing that that's not going to continue.
And a big beneficiary of all of it, Vladimir Putin
of
Russia.
Jillian Tett, thank you as always. Great to see you. Still ahead this morning, after days of heated rhetoric and all caps tweeting, President Trump now says he's ready to make a deal with Iran. We'll ask a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Chris Coons, for his take on that and more when we come back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.